The marble in the lobby of the Hartwell Tower had been polished to the kind of shine that made people walk differently, slower, as if the floor itself were watching. Daniel Reyes noticed that about wealthy buildings. The cleaner the floor, the more nervous everyone became. He'd been there since 6 that morning with a service trolley and a list of 7 flickering ballast units to replace. And by 9:30, he'd done 4 and was beginning to think about the sandwich in his bag and whether Lily had remembered her inhaler. He was on the 5th, balanced near the top of a stepladder under the mezzanine lights, when the noise of the lobby changed. It wasn't loud. That was the thing he'd remember later. A hush rolled in from the revolving doors, the sort that travels ahead of important people, and then a small cluster of dark suits crossed the floor with a woman at the center of them. She wore gray, expensive in a way that didn't announce itself, and she moved with one hand just slightly out in front of her, fingers loose, reading the air. There was a slim cane folded in her other hand, the kind that telescoped, and she wasn't using it. Daniel clocked all of that in about 2 seconds and then went back to the ballast, because it wasn't his business who came and went. The men around her were big and well-fed and bored. He'd seen the type. They walked like they were being filmed. She faltered near the floor seam where the old marble met the new. There was a lip there, 2 or 3 millimeters, nothing a sighted person would catch but enough. Her foot caught. Her weight went forward and to the side, the cane still folded uselessly in her grip, and for a half-second the whole choreography of the group broke. One bodyguard reached, then didn't, because reaching meant grabbing, and grabbing a woman like that without invitation was the kind of thing that ended careers. Another turned the wrong way entirely. A third said, "Ma'am," in a voice that was already too late to be useful. Daniel was off the ladder before he decided to be. He didn't think of it as brave. Afterward, people kept using that word, and it never sat right. He thought of it the way he thought of catching a glass off the edge of a table, a thing the body does ahead of the mind. He covered the distance, got a forearm under her shoulder and a hand flat against her back, and took the fall into his own frame instead of letting it go to the floor. Her temple stopped about a foot above the marble. He felt the whole length of her go rigid, and then, when she understood she wasn't falling, slowly unlock. "I've got you," he said. "You're all right. There's a step there, it's an uneven bit of floor, that's all. You didn't trip over nothing." That last part mattered to him, though he couldn't have said why in the moment. He'd noticed, fixing lights in places like this for 15 years, that people who couldn't see were often told they'd stumbled, as though the floor were innocent and they were clumsy. He wanted her to know the floor had done it. She held onto his sleeve a moment longer than she needed to. Up close, she was younger than the gray suit suggested, maybe 40, with a small scar above one eyebrow and the kind of stillness that comes from having learned to wait for information instead of grabbing at it. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was low and very even. "What's your name?" "Daniel." "Daniel what?" "Reyes." The bodyguards had clustered now, a beat too late, performing concern. One of them put a hand on Daniel's arm to draw it off her, gently, the way you'd remove a stranger from someone you were paid to protect, and the woman said, without raising her voice at all, "Don't." The hand came off. "He caught me," she said. "You didn't. Let's all remember which of those things happened." There was a silence then that the marble seemed to enjoy. Daniel helped her find her balance, made sure her feet were square, and then stepped back because that was the polite thing, and because his ladder was still standing under the mezzanine with a half-fitted ballast hanging out of it like a tooth. "You're fine now," he said. "Mind the seam on your way past. Whoever laid that new section did it lazy." "You noticed that," she said. "It's my floor as much as anyone's this week. I've been staring at it since 6. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, more the suggestion that one was being considered. "Eleanor Hartwell," she said, and held out her hand at exactly the right height, having tracked where his voice came from. He shook it. The name landed a second later. Hartwell, as in the tower, as in the brass letters 6 feet tall on the front of the building he'd been climbing around inside all morning. "Right," he said. "Well, mind the seam, Miss Hartwell." He went back to his ladder. He genuinely thought that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. What Daniel didn't know, climbing back up to the half-fitted ballast with his pulse still coming down, was that Alina Hartwell had spent the previous 11 months learning that almost no one around her would tell her the truth about anything. She had inherited the company 2 years earlier when her father died, and she had inherited it sightless. The condition that took her vision had been slow, and then suddenly not slow, finishing its work the same winter the old man's heart did. The board had assumed, in the careful way boards assume things, that she would be a figurehead, a name on the letterhead. They'd been wrong about that, but it had taken her the better part of a year to make them understand it, and the cost of that year had been a kind of permanent vigilance. She listened to everything now. She'd learned to hear the lie in a pause, the hedge in a cleared throat. She'd learned that the men who guarded her body would not catch her if she fell, because catching her meant a decision, and they had been trained never to be the one who decided. A maintenance electrician had decided in half a second. That was data, and Alina collected data the way other people collected grudges. She had her assistant, a sharp young woman named Priya, pull the contractor records before lunch. "Reyes," Priya read off her tablet in the car. "Daniel Reyes. He's not staff, he's through Callaway Building Services. They hold the maintenance contract for the tower and 4 other properties. Been on their books 11 years. Before that he was an apprentice with a firm that went under in the recession." A pause. Alina heard the small hesitation that meant Priya had found something she wasn't sure she should say. "There's a note on the contractor file. A complaint." "Read it." "It's from facilities. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Reyes apparently refused to certify some electrical work on the 18th floor and caused delay to the tenant fit-out." Priya's voice flattened in the way that meant she was reading bureaucratic language and didn't like the taste of it. "There's a recommendation that he be rotated off the Hartwell contract." Alina turned her face toward the window she couldn't see out of, which was a habit she'd never lost. "Rotated off," she repeated, "for refusing to certify work." "What was wrong with the work?" "It doesn't say." "No," Alina said, "it wouldn't." She had Priya make a note. The thing about the 18th floor was this. Daniel had been up there a month back, running a routine check before a new tenant moved in, a fintech firm. Lots of money, lots of hurry, and he'd found the kind of thing that made the back of his neck go cold. Someone had run the new high-load circuits off the building's old distribution boards without upgrading the protection, and they'd done it fast, and they'd done it cheap, and they'd labeled none of it correctly. To the eye it looked finished. To Daniel, who had spent 15 years learning to read what a panel was actually doing rather than what it claimed to be doing, it looked like a fire waiting for a busy Tuesday. He'd refused to sign it off. He'd written it up. He'd said in plain words on the form that the work didn't meet regulation and that certifying it would be putting his name to something that could hurt people. And for that he'd gotten a phone call from his own supervisor at Callaway, a man named Briggs, telling him to stop making trouble, that the tenant was important, that the building's facilities manager wanted it done by Friday, and that Daniel was, and Briggs actually used this phrase, not being a team player. Daniel had a daughter who was 9 and asthmatic, and whose mother had been gone for 4 years, and the words team player from a man like Briggs translated cleanly in his head to "we will take your work away if you keep being right." He knew exactly how much room he had to be principled. It was not a lot of room. People with mortgages and asthmatic children do not get to be principled for free. So he'd done a careful, miserable thing. He'd refused to put his name to it, because he wasn't going to be the one whose signature was on the paper if the place burned. But he hadn't pushed it up the chain past Briggs, because pushing it meant losing the contract, and losing the contract meant losing the work that paid for Lily's inhalers and the after-school care, and the small flat with the damp patch in the corner that he was slowly getting on top of. He told himself someone else would catch it. He told himself the new tenant's own electricians would flag it. He told himself a lot of things, the way you do, and none of them had made him sleep any better. And now, the woman who owned the whole tower had fallen into his arms and asked his name. He found out she'd remembered it 2 days later. He was on the 9th floor when his phone buzzed with a number he didn't know. He almost didn't answer. He'd learned that unknown numbers were usually trouble of one kind or another, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Reyes," a woman's voice, crisp, young. "My name's Priya Sharma. I work for Eleanor Hartwell. She'd like to speak with you. Are you in the building?" His first thought, ungenerous and instant, was that he was being fired in some elaborate top-floor way. That the catch in the lobby had somehow become a liability, that he'd touched a billionaire without permission, that there were rules about these things that people like him only found out about when they'd broken them. "Am I in trouble?" he said. It wasn't really a question. There was a small pause on the line, and then Priya said in a slightly different voice, less formal, "No. Honestly, no. It's the opposite of that. Can you come up to the 31st floor? She's got 20 minutes before her next thing." The 31st floor was a place Daniel had only ever seen as a row of breakers on a schematic. The lift opened onto a wide, quiet space with no clutter in it anywhere, which he understood after a moment was deliberate. Nothing on the floor to trip over, every piece of furniture in a fixed and learnable place. Eleanor Hartwell was standing by a window with her back to it, which struck him as a small dark joke she might be playing on her visitors, and she turned her head to the sound of the lift exactly the way she had in the lobby, tracking him by ear. "Daniel Reyes," she said, "you came up. You asked. People don't always do the thing you ask when you're me. They do the thing they think you want, which is usually different." She gestured at a chair, knowing where it was. "Sit. I won't waste your time. I haven't got much of it either. I had your file pulled." His stomach did something unpleasant. "Right. The complaint, the 18th floor." She let that sit there. "Tell me what was actually wrong with the work." And here was the moment, and Daniel knew it was the moment even as he stood in it. He could give her the soft version, the version where it was a difference of professional opinion, where everyone meant well, where he hedged and protected himself and stayed off anyone's list. Briggs's voice was in his head, not being a team player. He thought about Lily's inhaler, the blue one, how there'd been a fortnight last spring when they'd had to ration it because the prescription got tangled in some pharmacy error, and he hadn't had the money to just buy another over the counter. Then he thought about the panel on the 18th floor, and the way it would behave on the day someone plugged in 300 servers and went to lunch. "It's not safe," he said. "The work that was done up there. Someone ran modern high-load equipment off protection that was rated for a building half its age, and they did it without upgrading the boards, and they labeled it wrong on purpose so it'd pass a glance. If that tenant loads it the way a fintech firm loads it, you've got a real fire risk in an occupied tower. I refused to certify it. I put that in writing. And I got told I was holding up the schedule, and that I'd be rotated off this contract if I kept on about it." The room was very quiet, 31 floors of quiet. "Who told you that?" Eleanor asked. "My supervisor at Callaway, Briggs." "And does Briggs know it's unsafe, or does Briggs just know it's slow?" That was a sharp question, sharper than he'd expected. He turned it over. "Briggs knows it's slow," Daniel said slowly. "I don't think Briggs went and looked. I think Briggs got a call from someone in your facilities team who wanted it done, and Briggs's job is to keep the client happy, and I was the thing making the client unhappy." "So someone in my building," Eleanor said, "wanted unsafe work signed off, and when an electrician refused, they didn't fix the work. They tried to remove the electrician." When she put it like that, plainly in the open air, it sounded much worse than it had ever sounded inside Daniel's own anxious head. He'd spent a month telling himself it was complicated. It wasn't complicated. It had only ever been complicated because he'd needed it to be, because the simple version cost too much. Yeah, he said, that's about the size of it. Alina was quiet for a moment, and then she did something he didn't expect. She laughed short, not unkind, more like recognition than amusement. You know what I've spent the last year learning, Mr. Reyes? I've spent it learning that nobody around me will say a true thing if a comfortable thing is available instead. I have a board full of men who have known me since I was a child, and not one of them will tell me a fact that might cost them anything. And then I fall over in my own lobby, and the only person who will tell me the floor is uneven is a man on a stepladder. She tilted her head. Twice now. You've told me two true things that everyone else would have softened. I'm beginning to think you might be the only honest contractor in the building, which would be funny if it weren't a fire hazard. Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so he said the truthful thing again because it seemed to be working. I nearly didn't tell you, just now. I thought about giving you the easy version. Why didn't you? He thought about it. Because you'd have known, he said. I think you'd have heard it. And then I'd have been just another one of them. Something in her face shifted at that, a small genuine thing, and for a second she didn't look like the owner of a tower. She looked like a person who'd been very alone in a particular way for a very long time. Priya, she said to the air, and Priya appeared from a side room she'd evidently been waiting in. Get me the 18th floor fit-out file, the real one, not the summary, and find out who in facilities authorized the certification push. A beat. And cancel my 11 o'clock. Tell Marcus I'm dealing with a safety matter, which is true and which he'll hate, which is a bonus. What happened over the following 2 weeks was, depending on who you asked, either a routine compliance review or a quiet war. Alina Hartwell did not move fast and loud. She'd learned the limits of that. A blind woman who shouts gets called hysterical. A blind woman who shouts about money gets called paranoid. So she moved the other way slowly, with documents, with the patient accumulation of facts that could not be argued with. She had the 18th floor independently inspected by an outside engineer with no connection to Callaway, no connection to the facilities team, no reason to soften anything. And the outside engineer, a brisk woman named Hughes who'd spent 30 years signing her name to things that mattered, looked at the panels for 90 minutes and came back white around the mouth. This shouldn't have passed anything, Hughes said. Whoever ran this knew what they were doing, which is the worst part. You don't mislabel a board by accident. You mislabel it so the next person doesn't look too hard. Somebody wanted this to slip through. An electrician flagged it a month ago, Alina said. He refused to certify it. Hughes raised her eyebrows. Then your electrician's the reason this building isn't already on a watch list. Whoever he is, he's the only person who comes out of this looking like they did their job. The trouble, of course, was that doing his job had nearly cost Daniel that job. Because once the review started, Briggs found out where it had come from, and Briggs was not a stupid man, only a frightened one, and frightened men reach for the lever nearest their hand. The lever nearest Briggs's hand was Daniel's contract. Daniel got a call on a Thursday telling him he was being temporarily reassigned off the Hartwell properties pending a review of certification disputes, which was a sentence constructed entirely to mean you've made trouble and we're cutting you loose while keeping our hands clean. He stood in the stairwell of the 9th floor with the phone against his ear and felt the floor of his life tilt the way the marble lobby must have tilted under Alina Hartwell. He had 1,100 pounds in his account and a daughter and a flat with a damp patch, and he'd just been told in so many words that telling the truth had a price and the bill was now due. He didn't call Alina. He wanted to. There was a number in his phone now, Priya's, but he didn't, because some stubborn part of him refused to be the man who did a right thing and then ran to the powerful person to be rescued from the consequences. He'd done the thing because it was true. If the truth cost him the contract, then it cost him the contract, and he'd find other work. and he'd manage, because managing was the one skill 4 years of single fatherhood had drilled into him until it was load-bearing. He went home. He made Lily fish fingers and beans and didn't tell her anything was wrong, and she told him a long, complicated story about a girl at school named Sophie who'd been mean about somebody's lunchbox, and he listened to all of it and made the right noises. And after she went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table in the dark and folded a takeaway menu into smaller and smaller squares until it nearly tore. Alina found out he'd been reassigned the next morning because she told Priya to keep an eye on the Callaway contractor records, and the reassignment showed up in them like a flare. She was, by several accounts, extremely calm about it, which the people who knew her understood was the dangerous version of her. "Get me Callaway," she told Priya, "not Briggs, whoever owns the company. The actual owner. And get me the facilities manager, what's his name, Marcus's man. Tenant. Get me tenant. And get me the lease terms for our maintenance contract, because I want to know exactly how much of Callaway's revenue comes from Hartwell Properties before I get on the phone with the man who runs it." The answer to that last question turned out to be a great deal. Nearly 40% of Callaway Building Services' annual revenue came from Hartwell-owned buildings, which meant that when Alina Hartwell got the owner of Callaway on the phone, she was not a client making a complaint. She was, functionally, his largest source of income, calling to ask why he just punished the one employee who tried to stop a fire. She didn't threaten him, she didn't have to. That was the thing she'd learned about real power, as opposed to the loud kind, that the most frightening thing you can do to a man is lay the facts in front of him very gently and let him do his own arithmetic. "Mr. Callaway," she said, "2 weeks ago a man fell into my building's lobby and the only person who caught her was an electrician of yours named Daniel Reyes. That was me. I was the one who fell. He caught me." She let that land. A month before that, the same electrician refused to put his name to electrical work in my building that an independent engineer has now confirmed was a genuine fire risk to an occupied tower. He was right. He was right when it was inconvenient to be right, which is the only kind of right that costs anything. And this week, your company reassigned him off my properties for it, so I'm calling to understand. Did you know your firm punished a man for being right about a fire risk in my building, or is this the first you're hearing of it? There was a long silence on the line. Callaway, who had not built a business spanning 2 decades by being slow on the uptake, understood several things very quickly. He understood that 40% of his revenue was on the phone. He understood that Briggs had made a catastrophic misjudgment. And he understood that there was exactly one answer to Alina Hartwell's question that did not end with his largest contract going out to tender. "It's the first I'm hearing of it," Callaway said, "which may even have been true, and it won't stand. I'll deal with Briggs myself." "Good," Alina said. "2 things then. Mr. Reyes goes back on my properties today with an apology on full pay for the time he's lost, and the certification dispute he raised gets handled properly by an independent party, not buried by the people it embarrasses." A pause. "And Mr. Callaway, the next time someone in your firm tells an honest man he's not being a team player, I'd like you to consider that he might be the only team player you've got." The 18th floor got torn out and done again, correctly, at the expense of the facilities contractor who'd rushed it. After a review found that a man named Tennant had been taking the cheaper bid in exchange for considerations, he was now going to have a very uncomfortable time explaining. The fintech firm moved in 3 weeks late and never knew how close they'd come to learning what their server load did to an undersized board. Briggs left Callaway, not loudly, the way men like Briggs usually leave, with a story about pursuing other opportunities that fooled no one and embarrassed everyone politely. Daniel went back to work. He found out about most of it secondhand in pieces, the way you find out about whether that's already passed. He hadn't asked for any of it. That was important to him, and it turned out to be important to Alina too. She found him on the 18th floor a month later during the redo, because she'd asked Priya where he was working that day and had herself walked up. She did that now, walked the building, learned it floor by floor with her cane and her memory, refusing to be a woman who only existed on the 31st. "Mr. Reyes," she said, into the noise of a floor being rebuilt. He came over, wiping his hands. "Ms. Hartwell. They did it properly this time. They did it properly this time." He looked at the new boards, labeled right, protected right, the way work should be when nobody's cutting a corner to make a Friday. "It's good. It's how it should have been the first time. Because of you. Because somebody listened," he said. "That's the part that's rare. The flagging it, anyone careful does that. It's the listening that doesn't usually happen." She was quiet a moment. "I want to ask you something, and you can say no, because I've noticed you're one of the few people who will actually say no to me." A small, dry pause. "I'm setting up an independent safety review across all the Hartwell properties. Not a tick-box thing. A real one with teeth, run by people who can't be rotated off a contract for being inconvenient. I need someone to run the technical side of it who knows what a mislabeled board looks like and who won't soften the truth to keep a client comfortable." She turned her face toward him, tracking his breathing. "It pays considerably better than Callaway. It comes with the kind of security a man with a young daughter might value. And the entire point of the job is that you get to be right out loud, on purpose, as your actual job, forever. I can't think of anyone I'd trust with it more than the man who told me the floor was uneven." Daniel stood there on the 18th floor with his hands still half wiped, and felt something he didn't have a clean word for. It wasn't relief, exactly. It was more like the specific, disbelieving feeling of being seen accurately by someone who had every reason not to bother, of having spent 15 years being the careful man whose carefulness was a nuisance, and then meeting one person who understood it was the whole point. "How'd you know I've got a daughter?" he said, because it was easier than saying the rest. "You said inhalers the day I had your file pulled." To Priya on the phone, she mentioned it. Eleanor's mouth did the thing that was almost a smile. "I collect true things, Mr. Reyes, I told you. It's the only way I know what's actually going on when I can't see the room. People tell me what they think I want. You told me the floor was uneven." She held out her hand, at exactly the right height, having found his voice in the noise. "So, will you come and tell the truth professionally?" He looked at her hand. He thought about Lily, asleep that morning with one arm flung off the bed the way she always slept, fearless, certain the world would hold her. He thought about the damp patch in the corner of the flat that he might now actually be able to fix. He thought about the version of himself a month ago, folding a takeaway menu into smaller and smaller squares in a dark kitchen, certain that being right had finally cost him everything. It hadn't cost him everything. It had, in the strangest possible way, been the thing that caught him. He shook her hand. "Yeah," Daniel said. "All right, I'll come and tell the truth." "Good," said Eleanor Hartwell, and this time the almost smile made it all the way. "Mind the seam on your way out." "I've had it fixed, but old habits." He laughed, and the sound of it went out across the 18th floor, across the new boards labeled honestly, across a building that was, for the first time in a long while, exactly as safe as it claimed to be. And somewhere 31 floors up, the marble in the lobby went on being polished to a shine that made people walk differently. And the seam where the old floor met the new was smooth at last, and nobody who crossed it would ever know how much it had cost or who had paid.